This Choircast podcast episode is brought to you by The Reconstructionist by Jonathan J. Foster. With so much changing in our society around sexuality, authority, patriarchy, religion, truth, and more, what we need is a book to help us navigate those changes while keeping love at the forefront. The Reconstructionist is that kind of book. Pick a copy up today on Amazon or any other fine digital retailer. The Reconstructionist. People greater than text, mercy greater than sacrifice, and love greater than fear.
Western Christianity has spent the last 2,000 years telling everyone they're separated from God.
This is Not Church with John and Nat Turney and Bethany Shea.
Hi, everybody. Hi, friends. Welcome to This Is Not Church, the podcast that we are all here for today. So I'm really glad that you're all here. I'm here with John. Do you want to say hi, John?
Do I want to say hi, John? I'll say hi, John. Hi, John.
You don't have to. And usually when I'm introducing the podcast, it's because Nat is somewhere in Texas in an oil field somewhere. So today he's actually with us. So say hi, Nat.
Hi, Nat. How are y'all?
Has this ever happened to you before, Nat, where like somebody else has introduced the podcast and you have to say hello?
It has never happened before, and I don't know what happened to my voice. So John and I appeared. We were invited to. Actually, Bethany was too, but she blew us off for church because she's a good person.
I'm a pastor, so I'll do that.
Like you couldn't phone it in one Sunday, whatever. So John and I were on Heretic Happy Hour, their after hours live stream yesterday, and I smartly took my computer home so I could do that, and then I got halfway home or halfway back to where I work, and went, oh crap! I left the computer in the man cave at my house. So, long story short, I'm doing this from an app on my phone, which, by the way, is a brand new thing. Had this been a few months ago, I just wouldn't be here. I might cease to exist. It's sort of an existential thing, but. Be that as it may. That's why I asked Bethany to do a lovely job. I had to get the word lovely in at least once.
Yeah, you got to say lovely. I know it's just part of the way it goes.
I was actually listening to the podcast we did that was just released a couple weeks ago, and where you told a story about that parishioner picking you up and twirling you around, and that was re-embarrassed all over again. I'm like, for my gender, what a bunch of a-holes. But anyway, Bethany, introduce our guests, if you would, and let's get rocking.
I would love to. Yeah, we have another wonderful guest, as we always do. We're just so lucky to be able to meet such incredible humans. But Robert Callahan is a prolific writer and accomplished attorney dedicated to his practice at Callahan King in the heart of Waco, Texas. He earned his Bachelor's of Arts in Political Science from Gonzaga University and a Juris Doctorate at Baylor University School of Law, where he now serves as an adjunct professor of integrating faith and legal practice. In 2020, Callahan was named Lawyer of the Year by the Texas Criminal Defense Lawyers Association. That sounds very fancy, Lawyer of the Year. With an undeniable talent for blending humor and insight, he takes the spotlight in the arena's three-ring circus of law, race, and religion. Three-ring circus. Does it feel like a circus sometimes, Robert?
Every day. Yeah, I mean, trapeze act and everything. Let me just tell you. First of all, thank you for having me. And that reading of a bio, like, so for lawyers, reading a bio is like what do they call it? Like the come out music, you know?
Like you're walking, like you're walking to the ring. Hopefully not out of breath before you get there. Poor Mike.
Yeah, like I am sufficiently hyped. Thank you.
Nice. Oh, fantastic.
Beth is a great hype guy.
Do you go by Robert? Is that okay?
Yeah, Robert's
cool.
good. Robert's fine.
Nice. Well, we're stoked that you're here with us and to listen to who you are and the book that you just wrote and came out with. And one of the things that we do when we start off with guests is we just love to hear kind of your faith journey. Like, what has it been like if you're a person of faith? What has it been like to be a person of faith in today's American culture? And then I'm sure that there's been different parts of deconstruction that you've experienced. And what has that been like for you?
Yeah, so I was born and raised in the church. And when I say born and raised in the church, I mean like my mom had me in the church. I'm just kidding. That's not true. I was raised, my whole life, as far back as I can remember, I was raised in church. We were in a Southern Black Baptist congregation up until about the time that I was 14, at which point we were introduced to the non-denominational movement. And that was decidedly more eclectic because it was interracial as opposed to the Black Baptist church that I had grown up in. And, there's also the new components of, the gifts of the Spirit and speaking in tongues, things like that. Fast forward to, 2014 or so, when we started going to a church here in Waco. I came to Waco in 2002 for law school. My wife and I married in 2005. And we eventually joined a congregation that for our town, our city, which is like 250,000 more or less, this would be a mega church. It's about 4,000 members, so very large, spirit-filled, non-denominational vibe kind of church. And we were there serving in every capacity that you could think of for about 10 years and became decidedly more conservative, both theologically and politically, due to the influence of the church, and really thought that the church had our best interest in mind and we're a family, and we really bought into all of the trappings of the church. And around 2015, I started asking questions, when Trump was determined to be the Republican nominee and then elected in 2016. And there was a lot of cognitive dissonance, not just in my congregation, but also in the nation among Christians. And just the question of how can you be a believer and advocate for, not just vote for, that's its own problem, but advocate for such a charlatan. And that really started my deconstruction journey. In 2019, we left that church, and that was really, I think, sort of the peak on the mountain of my deconstruction journey. And then I started going downhill. And I talk in the book sometimes about how it felt like I was on a slippery slope, sort of the proverbial slippery slope. But I went all the way down and was hanging on by a frostbitten finger, and that's all I had to hold on to. And was fortunate enough to get help getting back up onto the ledge. But then once my deconstructing was complete, I had to decide what to do with it, because I didn't want to walk away from God. I still believed that there was value in my faith, but I felt like everything that I'd learned up until that point, everything that I understood as true, was a lie. And so I had to rebuild my faith from the atoms and the molecules. And so from that was really birthed this book, because I was really just trying to write my way out of depression and trying to maintain my sanity in a lot of ways. And I just felt like there was no justifiable excuse for everything that was going on around us. And so my faith journey became not just a journey into healing for myself, but also understanding why this anger that's in me, this frustration that's in me, is justified and is righteous and is holy. And I thought, well, if I need to hear this, other people need to hear it too.
Yeah. Yeah. You say that when you were experiencing some of these things in 2019 and you were holding on by a frostbitten finger. What a great picture that is. You got helped off the ledge. Who was somebody that helped you, or did you find a community that was able to feel safe for you at that time?
Yeah. So at that point, we landed in a community that was helpful for us. We're no longer there at this point, and that's okay. I think that there's a temptation for us to believe that once you find a congregation, that it has to be your forever congregation. It's like you have to be married to it. And sometimes a church congregation, a particular place, will serve for a while, and then sometimes it no longer does, and that's okay. But the pastors there were the ones that helped me up from the ledge. And what was really neat about that place, it was truly a multicultural. It was not just a multi-ethnic, but a multicultural church, meaning that we were allowed to be our full authentic selves at that church. And so it was okay for people to show up as they were, for who they were for the most part. Whereas in the church that I previously had attended for 10 years, and I jokingly refer to it as Toxic Fellowship, Inc. in the book. At that church, there was a lot of diversity, but it was storefront diversity. It was sort of a facade because once you get inside, there was an expectation that everyone had the same theological and political views. So at this new church, we found that we could be our whole selves, and we found that the liturgy reading could be in the language of people that weren't white, and that whiteness wasn't normative, that the songs could be in the language of other people than the normative culture. And so we learned in that church that for all the talk about diversity and unity that I had been hearing all those years, that there is a model of church where talking about race, we're talking about women and the LGBTQIA community, and incorporating us all together, dignifying all these diverse peoples, was a normal kingdom ethic. And so what I learned from that was, at my old church, there was a lot, whenever I would speak out about racism or something like that, I would get told, "You're so brave for speaking out," or just, "I appreciate how brave you are to talk about these things." And when I got to a place where it's normal to talk about these things, and that it's part of the biblical application of how we read the Bible, I realized that it's not bravery that's keeping the white church from talking about these things, or I should say it's not a lack of courage that's keeping the white church from speaking about these things. It's a lack of integrity. And so now where we are is sort of hopping between two churches, actually. So there's two churches that we go to, both of which are led by women pastors that are affirming and that have just the understanding of the Imago Dei, right? That we're all created in the Creator's image, and that there's value and dignity inherent to who we are, and that we can all show up as our full selves. But quite honestly, church is difficult, even with those environments being very comfortable, very welcoming. I'm not at a place, and this is hard too, because I'm an Enneagram 8. I don't know if you can tell from how much I'm talking. But, I'm at a place where I just feel very introverted on Sunday morning. I don't really want to put myself out there. I can't really stomach the idea of putting my heart back out on my sleeve and extending my arm and being invited to a small group and things like that. Thank you. I appreciate it. But, right now I'm feeling kind of insular. And so I think that's okay. This is the season that I'm in right now. I know that I'm not going to lose my faith because of how I'm feeling right now, but I know that I still have a genuine faith and a love for God, and I have community. It's just not the church community.
You said earlier that one of the things that happened in what you were describing as your deconstruction is you had questions. You started having questions. What were some of the first questions that were coming up that made you realize that this was not maybe the right church for you?
Well, I'll give you two answers to that. So what I realized, the tipping point for me when I realized that TFI was no longer the right church for us, was I found myself compartmentalizing what I believe as a Christian from the place that I attended church. And so the values and the understanding of the gospel that I had did not compute with what was being preached from the pulpit or displayed in the everyday lives of the people that I was interacting with, especially the people that I was in small group with who, loved to see me every week and, shake hands in the hallway and all that stuff, but it wasn't real community. And so when I realized that I was compartmentalizing those things, I realized, like, who are you fooling? Like, this place isn't for you. The second answer I'll give you is, I remember what sent me over the edge. I had grown up with a understanding that when it comes to the creation narrative, right, in Genesis, it may not be a literal narrative, but it's somewhere in the ballpark, right? It may not have been a literal 6 days plus a 1 day resting period, but maybe it was like a day is 1,000 years, 1,000 years is a day, that whole thing, like it's something like that. So I started reading and listening to podcasts talking about ancient cosmology. And they talked about how the story. So first of all, remember that we believe that the book of Genesis was written by Moses. Moses was said to have been raised in Pharaoh's house, right? He was adopted by Pharaoh's daughter, raised in his house. So he would have been surrounded by and made privy to and educated about all these cultures around them, such as the Sumerian culture, such as the Babylonian culture. And there are narratives of creation that we have archaeological evidence for that mirror a lot of what Moses wrote in Genesis. And of course, we know that the name Adam or Adam literally means human. And so when I realized, I started putting these things together and I said, wow, if this is allegory, if this is eponymy, then what's going on here? What's the purpose behind Genesis? So it's not, it turns out, to teach us a literal scientific truth about creation, but rather to give context to the people in that community at that time who were hearing other creation narratives and say, hey, this is what we say, or this is the narrative that we've created in order to establish that there was a point in time where humanity made a choice, right? Whether to obey God or whether to disobey. And that's the thing that separates us from the divine. And that's the thing that ultimately keeps us continually messing it up. And so I think that when I realized that that story wasn't literal or even close to the ballpark of being literal, that's the thing. That was like the one straw too many. That was like, I'd heard things about translations and it was too much. And so I really had to take it back, like, using the analogy of I'm in Waco, Texas, and Fixer Upper is a big deal here. So it was demo day. Right? We're taking out the walls. We're down to the studs.
That's right.
That's right. And it's one thing to deconstruct when it's like, hey, there's some good bones here, but we can reshape the general structure. I took it down to the studs and found out that the studs were no good. Like there was mold. And so then you're left with nothing but a foundation. And then come to find out we have foundation issues too. The whole foundation is skewed. And then so we rebuild the foundation and the soil is contaminated. Like it was just as base level as you can go. I found myself questioning the authenticity and the historical accuracy of many figures in the Bible. And so I had to literally decide what was I going to reincorporate. Everything was on the table. What was I going to reincorporate in order to establish my faith?
Oh, no, that's great. Nat and I, like Nat said just a few minutes ago, Nat and I were on a different podcast yesterday. And one of the things that we brought up was that deconstruction isn't even really a word that we want to use anymore. And we've kind of moved from deconstruction to, we're now calling it decolonizing. Mm. We need to decolonize our faith. And I feel like a lot of what's in your book is exactly that, is asking us to decolonize from this white Christian nationalist type of religion that a lot of us were raised in. I don't really have a solid question in this, but I just wanted to mention that I definitely connected with that part of your book, which is the majority of your book.
Yeah. I appreciate it. It's definitely, I think that when you're looking at something through the lens of a Black author, which I am, right, it inherently lends itself to decolonization. If you're, a progressive Black author such as myself. But I think that you've hit on something, which is that there's a lot of people that do deconstruction, but they don't decolonize. And so you can still end up in the same or worse place. And so you have to be very intentional about it. And so there's a point towards the end of the book where I'm talking about different things that I think will be helpful to help people in their healing journey. And one of them is very intentionally decolonizing your faith in your bookshelf.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
That's language that guys like John and I are in our 50s and we're just now hearing, and so the issue is for us, it's so deeply ingrained, it has to be rooted out and it has to be pointed out. And oftentimes painfully so. We have to come to terms with how much of that has just been sort of pushed into our DNA. And then, but so talking to guys like you but that's for us, like like you said, you can deconstruct so far. And if you're not careful, we had this discussion with, I can't remember who it was now, but it was Bio, probably. I always come back to Bio Okomalafe, who's essentially was telling us, when you're done with the deconstruction, don't be in a hurry to reconstruct anything. You'll just mess it up again. If you don't have new tools, if you don't have new designs, it may look different superficially, but you could very well end up in just a prettier version of this shit show that we've been living in for the last 30 years. So, his suggestion was let the ground lay fallow for a generation or two and let somebody else. I'm ready to just to give it all over to the women. And I'm convinced I will never go to a church. Number one, I probably never will attend a church again. And number two, if I ever did, it would not be to sit under a male pastor. I just don't think I could do it. And I'm ready to put women in power across the board. I was super excited to have a woman president. I voted straight woman down the ticket. I don't even care. Republican, Democrat, just give me women. We've messed this up for way, way, way too long and proved I don't think that we're capable of leadership. But anyway, the decolonizing language that you talk about, how do you think that takes root? Let me ask you this. How does it take root even inside of maybe the Black church?
I'm glad that
we can assume that it maybe doesn't, but I guarantee it probably does.
No, 100%. In the same way that we know of women that there can be internalized misogyny, we also know that it's true that we can, as Black people, as minorities, that we ourselves can fall victim to white Christianity. And so in the book, so starting with the title of the book, the title of the book is Fire in the Hole, and whole is spelled WHOLE. And then the subtitle is Embracing Our Righteous Anger with White Christianity and Reclaiming Our Wholeness. And the reason why I point that out is because one of the definitions that I talk about for what white Christianity is, like if we're talking about like what's the problem? The issue is white Christianity. So how do we then solve that problem? And so I define terms and I talk about the fact that we view white Christianity, when we're viewing a certain type of Christianity as normative, as like there's only one right way to do this, and this is what we've been taught through tradition, and we're going to potentially, even as minorities, perpetuate the ills of white Christianity. So one of the definitions that I give is on page 13, and I say that white Christianity is shorthand to describe those whose orthodoxy and orthopraxy are dictated by an unshakable yet misguided tangle of faith and right-bridled political and social conviction that are antithetical to everything Christ represents. Okay, that was King James version, right? So let me give you the Message version.
That'd be great. Thanks.
So on page 14, white Christianity is also that subset of Christianity that intentionally ignores or does not consciously consider the effects of racism or prejudice in either the church or society on the marginalized, nor cares to, having been given the resources and information to do so. So white Christianity is not about Christians who are white. It is about what we consider to be normative. It's about what we ignore. It's about what we parse out in order to present a form of the gospel that looks a whole lot like a certain political party's ideology. So yes, and to elaborate on that, one of the reasons why I really like your question is that I had to deal with pretty early on the fact that I identified as conservative at one point in time. I was socially conservative. And I realized that so much of what I had adopted as the true understanding of what's biblical or what's sin or what is, like how I should do this project called faith has been handed to me through whiteness. And so when I realized that, I realized, oh, wow, like there's this, I have to decolonize. Like there's this whole misunderstanding of the gospel that I've been carrying as a Black man that was not mine to begin with. And, James Cone says that oppressor and oppressed cannot mean the same thing when they're talking about God. So I'll tell you another thing that's important to me is, and you talked about how important it is to have women in leadership and women in ministry leadership. I discovered this in 2019. So up until that point, I would say that I was still toxic. I call myself a recovering toxic male. And the reason why I call myself that way is because I feel like in the same way that, an addict is told and is trained to understand, like, you're an addict for life. You may not for 20, 30, 40, 50 years touch a drug, but when you are addicted to something that's toxic to you, you have to recognize I can't go back. And at any point in time, I can. And that's in me. So I understand about myself that I can be misogynistic. I can be patriarchal, and I can continue to cause harm, even thinking that I've got it right. So the way I got there was 2019. I'm trying to find vocabulary for all the frustration that I'm feeling as we're looking at leaving this church. And I'm realizing, like, the paternalism, the way that, like, I'm being talked down to, feeling like I had to code switch, feeling like I had to wear a mask in certain environments, that I had to sort of shape shift. I had to be one thing in one place and adapt to survive in that space. The erasure, the gaslighting. These are all things that I learned language for listening to women talk about patriarchy. And so when I realized, oh, I, as a Black male, am hearing myself say things that women have been talking about for years. That's not to compare struggles, but the point being, number one, I was blind. But number two, I learned from that racism and patriarchy go hand in hand. And so when I realized that, it started to giving me tools for my deconstruction process. It started helping me identify the vocabulary, the language for things that were going on that I was observing.
Wow. I was really struck by this example of, like, the difference between deconstruction and decolonization, because deconstruction feels like something that is painful and hard, but it seems a lot easier than the decolonization work that would be required. My family went to Mexico to build a house a few years ago, with a missions group or whatever. And it's built by teenagers, which is already a terrible idea. And we had to, like, lay the foundation first and remove all the rocks and try to get it all level. And the people that we could see, like, these rain clouds coming in, and we knew we had to get the foundation poured immediately, but it wasn't level, and it wasn't level, and it wasn't level. And this one guy was just like, we're making it level, or we're not making it level. We're just going to pour it and go with it. And my husband's a general contractor, and he was like, it's not going to work out if we don't make sure the foundation is right. And the other guy was kind of a bully, and he's like, we're doing it no matter what. So we poured the foundation. And then when we built this house, lo and behold, when we put the roof together, it was plumb on one side and had like a 3-inch gap on the other side of the house. And we just tar papered over it and went on our way, praying that it would hold through the weather for this family that we've now blessed with this house. And the decolonization means that it's not just tar papering over the holes or trying to, like, keep the rain out for as long as we possibly can. Sometimes it means that we have to, like, go all the way back to the foundation and see where is it damaged? Like, where is the poison coming up from the foundation that's actually ruining the structure of everything? Yeah. And so I want to know if you're able to share. I'm a pastor. I pastor a non-denominational church, and as a white woman, I know that there is just a lot that needs to be decolonized within our own church structures. And so, how would you recommend even just the most simple steps to start as a church community to get to that place?
Thank you for that question. That's a fantastic question. So I think that one of the things I would recommend for pastors is who's in your leadership. And by the way, this is when you look at the last 2 pages or so of the book, there's a series of questions. There's 2 sets of 10 questions that help you understand what kinds of questions to ask in order to get an understanding of, like, where am I in this process and what do I need to do in order to make my way through this journey, right? And so, is this space safe for me as a minority? Is one of the things that we're trying to figure out. And so, I ask people, who's in leadership? Who's, and I'm not talking about just like, the volunteer pastor and then like, the senior pastor, but like, who has actual authority? Who are the elders on the board? Who's in positions and roles of leadership in the worship team? Is the diverse member of the worship team a volunteer, or is this someone that's paid on staff as well, who gets to actually live off of and benefit from being paid a fair wage to do the work that they do? What about the traditions that you utilize? So, for example, the church that we were in for 3 years or so when I was going through my reconstructing journey was a very diverse church. So we would have the liturgy readings. We had people in our congregation that spoke Mandarin. We had people in our congregation that spoke Spanish. So we would have liturgy readings that were in languages other than ours during times like Asian American Heritage Month, sort of a thing. Or if it's, I can't remember which month it is. I think maybe May or June is Pride Month. I can't remember which one it was, but basically, is it okay for people who are on the margins to lead? And so that's another way that I think, and there's something too, I think, powerful about decentering your culture as you're hearing the word of God rendered in another language. So we would have the translation for the Bible during the liturgy reading on the screen, but then the person's reading it in their native tongue. And so you're hearing it in their language. And there's something really beautiful about that. And it, in a place where you're trying to decenter yourself anyway, right? Because you're trying to, this experience is all about God. It's just I thought it was really valuable. If you live in a community where it's predominantly white, that's okay. That doesn't indicate that you're doing a poor job recruiting, so to speak. But what resources are you tapping your congregation into? So when you're quoting theologians, are they, old dead slaveholding theologians, or theologians of other cultures that are present? So there's ways to just to decenter the normalization of whiteness as the presumption for how we view the Bible.
I hadn't thought about that. I pastored for many years, and I live in in West Texas, so not the most ethnically diverse place in the world, but I could have done a better job of bringing in thoughts and books and ideas from a wider variety of people that I was quoting. I realized this even, and this is why I'm saying this decolonization thing is so much more difficult, because I went through and I wrote a book last year, and it didn't even occur to me till somebody pointed it out that 90% of my quotes were old white dudes. I'm like, I didn't quote hardly any women. I certainly didn't quote hardly, and it wasn't intentional. It just was this sort of default setting in me. So when I'm thinking about decolonization, I want to go back to your analogy, Robert, of, okay, we've deconstructed down to the studs. We've deconstructed down to the foundation. We found that's faulty. And now we find that the soil is toxic. That, to me, is the decolonization. It's finding out, it's not just that you built the structure wrong. It's that you used the wrong materials. And even the place where you're building is so infiltrated with this toxic thought that it's going to take a lot more work. I can tear something down pretty easily. I'm really good at that. That's my wife. I'm good at like projects where it's just about demolition. Give me a sledgehammer and let's roll. But this other part, and I honestly, so I think deconstruction, while important for a lot of us, was really important. I mean, it was critical. And now the hard work starts. Now we have to find out where all those little remnants of toxic theology and ideology and patriarchy and misogyny, how they've wormed their way into the soil. And I think that's really powerful what you said. I'm going to ruminate on that for some time, and might have to call my environmental guys out to do some soil sampling. But that's a lot more, to me, that's a lot more, I won't say it's more important. It's just much more difficult.
It's a lot more daunting because it's really the case that this has been the water that we swam in.
Yeah,
for so
exactly.
long. And so there's a spoken word poet that I love. His name's Kyle, and he goes by Guante. I can't remember his last name, but I quote him in the book. He talks about how we sort of assume that racism is the shark that's in the water. And the truth is, it's the water itself.
Yeah.
And so when you do realize that, like, all these, for example, systems of injustice, like, people will say the system's broken. And I just want to remind them, it's sort of like that meme, like, the system is not broken. It is operating exactly as it was designed to function. And so, like, when you realize that, that's like a new level. And it can be scary, discouraging, frustrating. And it's all still necessary part of the work. I think another way, going back to Bethany's question, is who are you being mentored by? Because your congregation is going to benefit from the insights that, what are you reading? What podcasts are you listening to? Like, what voices are you listening to? Are they members of the handicapped community? Are they the disabled community? Are they members of the LGBTQIA community? Are they women? Are they racial minorities? And I think it's really important that people understand, when I talk about minorities in the context of this conversation, I include all those communities. Anyone that considers themselves, or anyone that can be considered a part of a marginalized community. That's who I'm looking out for. That's who I'm talking about. And so when you're looking for voices, for example, if you're looking for Black voices as leadership voices, are you looking for, I want to be real careful on how I say this, are you looking for voices that are authentic to the culture itself, or ones that sort of affirm your perspective already? So, 2020, for example, when I was talking about racism on social media, my inbox was just flooded with Candace Owens.
Oh, sweet Jesus.
It's like, if they have fire, like, if they have howitzers, we have to have howitzers, right? Like, we're gonna fight fire with fire. We're gonna fight Black people with Black people.
Oh, my God.
They would weaponize, people that are not representative of the culture as a whole, right? They would throw Vodi Bakum at me, right? Like, that's not representative of the culture. And so, are you listening to voices that are representative of the culture, or are you listening to people that are going to sort of make you more comfortable? And if your faith, if your journey, if your mission requires nothing of you, then it's probably not of God. And then I would also say another great way I think it's important for us to, especially since I've been out of church, I've come to this realization that it's important for us to get beyond the idea that our fellowship with believers is Sunday morning only, or Sunday morning only, and then we have small group on Wednesday. Like, the idea that we herd everybody into this building to hear the one person preach for an hour, and then we go home. There are a lot of pastors that I follow on social media who are pastoring me, and they don't even really realize it. one of the voices that just meant so much to me in the last, I would say last 3-4 years was Zach Lambert, who has a church called Restore in Austin. And I got a chance to meet him once in person in Austin, and it was fantastic. But I've never been to his church. I may never get to his church on a Sunday morning, but just the way that he advocates for people through just his daily expression of social media, just how he engages the world is as a defender of the marginalized. And so he is pastoring, even though he's not on the pulpit. And so, and to show you the other side of that coin, one of the reasons that I was so frustrated with TFI and that we were so ready to leave is because it wasn't always the things that were said from the pulpit that were problematic, although that did happen from time to time. It was the things that were being said by the people sitting next to me on the pews every day and publicly on social media, and you knew everybody saw it, and nobody, no other parishioners, no church leaders, nobody was saying, hey, that's not okay. That's not appropriate. That's not what believers should, take away from X, Y, and Z. And so I realized that there was a complete lack of mentorship and they didn't, I should say discipleship, and they didn't want to invest in that discipleship. And the reason that they didn't want to invest is because they believed what these people were saying, which gets me onto another soapbox. But yeah, I think that it's important for us to remember that we disciple in more ways than just from the pulpit.
Yeah, that's really good. Have you, being outside of a church setting in the more recent years, and seeing church beyond just a Sunday gathering, you talk a lot about fire in your book and community around the fire. Have you experienced that in your own life, and how do you facilitate those spaces for yourself?
Yeah, so we have a fire pit in our backyard, and to bring everyone in on the conversation, there's the image of fire is important throughout the book for a few reasons. Number one, I was inspired by Jeremiah, chapter 20, verse 8 and 9, where Jeremiah is talking about every time he talks about the Lord, he feels like he's made a subject of ridicule and mocking and scoff. But if he doesn't, then he feels like it's this fire that's trapped up in his bones. And so he has no other choice but to speak. And that's how it feels as a minority who is looking around the world at everything that's wrong about the church and saying, but you taught us, you are the one that taught us that God was the defender of the lowly, of the oppressed, of the marginalized, of the widow, of the orphan. And none of that's important to you. You taught us the value of loving our neighbor, and that's not important to you. So in the book, there's 3 phases or 3 sections of the book. The first section of the book, fire is a gathering place. It's like a beacon, like a fire pit or a fireplace or a bonfire that you might have, where you just have the chance to have really personal, intimate conversations and sort of identify, hey, you're here too. You're here too. Oh, wow. It's not just me. I'm not crazy. Okay. So let's understand that there's a community here. That's what I wanted to do in the first section of the book. In the second section, fire becomes a heat source. So we start adding to the fire. So we take things off of our shoulders, kind of, 1990s evangelical church style, write something on a piece of paper and throw it into the fire kind of a thing.
Yeah, or burn your CDs.
Or burn your CDs, burn your DVDs. That's right. Yeah. So I want people to have a ritual that they can do. I wanted to make this as much as possible something that was seen and felt and heard. And so there's even a soundtrack, if you will, that was created, a Spotify playlist that was created by our publisher with my guidance. Songs that inspired me, songs that I talk about in the book. Some of the chapter titles are named after these songs. This is music that I listened to while I wrote the book. I want people to be able to gather in small groups together and say, I am so tired of, fill in the blank. And then like, hey, while we're here, let's write that down. I'm not carrying this, I'm not carrying being talked down to anymore. I'm not carrying wearing a mask anymore. Throw it in the fire, like just to give you a sense of therapeutically seeing, I'm letting go of this thing. And that's something that I have done. That's what we were doing. And we would gather, especially during the height of the pandemic. We couldn't have people in our homes, or we were afraid to go somewhere, and we have a fire pit in our backyard. So we would have people over all the time and just have these wonderful conversations. And so I just wanted to sort of bring people into that space to kind of replicate that. And then in the last part of the book, fire is a light, it's illumination. And so the idea is that we're now breaking camp, so to speak, and we all are carrying with us this righteous anger, this fire that is inside of us. And the more of us that there are, the greater the illumination is as we make our path forward. And so it's something, fire, we get to take it with us. And this understanding that our anger is righteous and it's holy and it has a place, gets to go with us. And so that's the value of fire in the book.
Can you share a little bit more about that righteous anger that you're talking about? Just like, what does that look like? How does it differentiate from angry as a bitter term? Or I always see anger as something that tells us that something is wrong. And so we have to respond in a way that is healing through our anger. But what does that look like in your life?
That is a perfect description. Anger is something that tells us that something is wrong. And so, first of all, I want to start with why are we angry, right? So it's important for people to understand, I don't give any benefit of ignorance to anyone in the church in the information age in terms of the offenses that are being committed against us, against marginalized communities. And I spend a lot of time explaining why it is that we cannot give them the benefit of ignorance. If you are allowing yourself to say, oh, well, they don't understand, they didn't read this thing, they're not well versed enough. There's a lot of things that we can do. We can sort of gaslight ourselves and talk ourselves into staying in toxic environments because we're excusing conduct that's not excusable, right? And so we rationalize and we say, well, maybe if I stay in the church longer, even though this environment is completely hostile and toxic to me and I have no business being here anymore and it's soul crushing and not soul uplifting, maybe if I stay, I can change the institution from the inside out, right? Like, maybe if I stay with him, then I can change him, right? It's like abusive victim talk. Maybe if I introduce the pastor to this podcast, this book, this minority pastor, maybe if I go on social media and do this, maybe if I start a nonprofit, start this program, if I just, maybe we will talk ourselves into rationalizing staying in these toxic environments. And what I want people to understand is at the point that you realize that they're not going to change, you have to ask yourself why. It's not lack of information. There's too much information out there. It's you as a minority, as a marginalized member of the community, you are one of the best resources that they have, and they won't tap you as a resource. So it's not a lack of information. So what is it? Why can't you sway them to get off of this programming that they have? And when you realize it's because they want that program, they have designed that program. It's not a bug, it's a feature. The system isn't broken, it's operating exactly how they designed it to operate. And so that's why you can't get your pastor off of the rhetoric, the political rhetoric and the Trumpism and the QAnon conspiracies and say, like, you cannot change his mind. You cannot, there's nothing that you can show him or interpret for him about the gospel, even if you have more religious training than they do. Right? Because a lot of non-denominational pastors are not trained religiously. And so there's nothing you can say to change their mind. So when you understand that it's because they have the system set up the way that they want it, and it's running the way that they want it, and you are a problem, you are a stick gumming up the cogs, right? Then that gives you permission to be angry, because now it's not just incidental abuse that's being visited upon you. It's intentional conduct. And it doesn't have to be, when I say intentional conduct, it doesn't have to be that their goal and design was to hurt you. It's that they are engaging in these actions intentionally. And even if it's just like they know exactly what it's doing, or they know and they don't care, or if it's just complete negligence, they don't know, but they should know better because it's the information age and you're available and all these other resources are available to them. When you realize that, it gives you permission to be angry, right? So now what do we do with that anger? What is anger in this context? So what I want to make really clear is, first of all, anger has the ability to be righteous. It has the ability to have a righteous expression. What I mean by that is a lot of people want to talk about table flipping. And what I use as an analogy in the book is, in 1 Samuel, Saul has his first test as king. And there's an opposing force that has surrounded a remote part of his domain, and the people there are being taken siege, and they send messengers out asking to be rescued, asking for help. And the Bible says that when Saul reads the message, or when he hears the message, that the Holy Spirit came upon him and he burned with anger. And I was like, oh, the Holy Spirit put that anger in him. And so the next thing that he does is he rallies the people to go protect those people, right? And so when anger is causing us to be protective, when it's causing us to build wider tables, when it's causing us to remove ourselves, acting as a catalyst to remove ourselves from toxic spaces, then it's right, it's righteous, and it's holy, and it has a purpose.
I love that. And I can't help but remember all the times in my life when we were chided for anger, and essentially told, and there's the whole, be angry but don't sin. Mm-hmm. And so, well, what does that mean? So, I think that's been used against women a lot, by the way. Certainly has been used against people of color a bunch. But there is, but I agree with you, man. There's this idea of a righteous anger. There are some things that should just piss you off. And if they don't piss you off, that's a heart check. Like if people being abused and marginalized and injured on purpose or unintentionally, or through, like you said, even just gross negligence, does not piss you off, I gotta wonder if we're reading the same gospel, man.
Right.
It's time to. So I'm again, like John, no question in that. Just a resounding yes. We spent a good chunk of our podcast with Matt DiStefano and John and I just being pissed off, just being like, you know what? I can't believe this happened. I can't believe it happened once. I can't believe it happened twice. Holy shit! What are we gonna do? Well, I guess. Yeah, like seize on this moment and be like, you know what? Matt says the best. I don't know if you know Matt DiStefano, but you should. You'd love him. But he's just like, I'm just going to be petty as hell. I'm just going to, because Michelle Obama can go high. I'm going mid or low. I'm going to be petty AF for the next 4 years. I'm just not playing this nice game anymore. It has gotten us nowhere. It's gotten us 4 more years of bullshit. Go ahead, John. I'm sorry.
Well, I was just going to say, and that's the standard answer by us white people is, well, can't we just find some common ground, and can't we just get along? And sometimes that's the worst answer, because we're not looking at the racism that's embedded in the system, and we can't fix it if we're going to keep sliding it and sweeping it under the rug, right?
Right. Yeah, one of the discussions that I have in the book is about this idea of unity, because there's a lot of really superficial ideas of reconciliation that are floating around. And so what I wanted to make it really clear is, like, you can have unity and still not be a properly functioning body. So Nazis were unified. Gangs are unified. but that doesn't mean that they're operating correctly, right? And so what we need is a correctly cohesive operating body of Christ. And so that means that we have to have fundamentally a right understanding of what Christ asks of us. And for that matter, when I'm talking about decolonizing and deconstructing and like what I'm reincorporating, I want to make it really clear that I still believe that our Bible is important. I stray from, I didn't go to seminary, so I stray from using terms like the inerrant, infallible word of light, because that stuff is so just weighted and on top of that, like I found that the terms don't mean what they should mean. Like as a lawyer, it's really hard because like we live and die by our words, and it's like you're not using the right definition for this word. But what I've learned is that the Bible is not one book. It is a library, and it is a library that was written almost exclusively by men, and what was canonized exclusively by men. And it was written, the things that were written in it were written in a certain time and place and context for a certain audience. And there are parallels that can be drawn. There are things that we can take away from it today, but there are even places where there are disagreement. Like, for example, you have places where Jesus says, "You've heard it said, fill in the blank, but I say, fill in the blank." And what is he doing? He's pointing to the prophets. He's saying, like, in the Old Testament, you heard it said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, but I tell you. So what does that tell us? That means that there is a better, richer, fuller understanding of the gospel, and it's rooted in love, right? And so when I have that understanding, like, it was ironically, maybe not, anger plays a place when we see the perversion of that. And so I start with Jesus. Like, what did he say? Because he's the model, right? And so what he says has to be more important than Paul. It has to be. Paul never met him in the flesh. I mean, he had a road to this Damascus event, right? And then I believe that there are people who the prophets, like I believe that they thought that the Lord was speaking through them. And that happens today. There are times that well-intentioned people prophesy and say things that they fully believe are the words of God, right? But nevertheless hurt people. And I think that we have this sense of believing, like Boxology podcast, Mike Erie and Tim Stafford talk about like the Bible coming down as a golden document from the sky and being handed to us in perfect English. Like, I mean, that's not how we got it, right? And so we can idolize the Bible and tend to think, well, if Paul was like, never mind the fact that maybe Mark was low-key racist, we're not going to talk about the fact that Paul might have been misogynistic. Like that can't possibly be the case because he's Paul, right? And so like we just have to take what Jesus said has to take precedent. And so I start with Jesus, and then everything gets reconciled through Jesus. Jesus is the lens that I look at all scripture with now.
To be. Well, I have said for a long time that everything bends the knee to Jesus, and that includes scripture. Everything. At the name of Jesus, every knee will bow, right? Well, that means scripture bends the knee too. And to the point, and to the extent that we've gotten Paul very, very wrong. John Dominic Crossan is a very good resource on this, or how much of the New Testament is an intentional attempt to de-radicalize Paul and to put words in his mouth that he never said. There's some very, very good scholarship going on there that will rescue Paul from the ash heap of history, because turns out not a misogynist, but turns out some of his contemporaries were. And so, but even so, John and I grew up, and that was one of the big dominoes to fall, I think, for both of us, because we grew up in a very, I would say we were almost not Christian. We were Paulian, because we focused more on the words of Paul. I almost never heard anyone preach on the Sermon on the Mount, because that doesn't make a good script. That's not a great sermon. That's a difficult one. But I sure heard a lot about how women should shut up in the church. And how God had a lot of bad things to say about the gay folks, and how, I'm sorry, I'm just speaking the truth. It's in the Bible, while they spew their hate and their shit. So it has to be stripped down. And you're exactly right. So we go back to our deconstruction analogy, I guess. And if the foundation is not Jesus, it's all askew. It's a carnival fun house, and it just with not fun results. But man, Robert, we could talk for hours, man. This is such good stuff. I say this to many of our guests, but I usually mean it. But legitimately, like I feel like we've only just barely scratched the surface. If you're still listening, and why would you not be? The book is called Fire in the Hole. I didn't see the subtitle, John. You tried to help me out there. And
right. Embracing our righteous anger with white Christianity and reclaiming our wholeness.
Good. I don't have a problem. I'm embracing all my anger with white Christianity. I'm mad as hell, and I don't think I'm gonna take it anymore. But that book is out, right, and available. If you're a pastor, a leader of some kind, this would be a really, really good resource to bring into a small group setting, to bring into a Sunday morning, and start having some of these conversations that may not be comfortable, but but they need to be had. And, we can agree, John and I talked about this yesterday a little bit too, because that agree to disagree thing only gets you so far. There are things we cannot agree to disagree about.
Right.
We can agree to disagree that chocolate is better than vanilla, or that pineapple doesn't belong on pizza, or
Wait a minute.
I, for one, wholly believe pineapple on pizza is fantastic. I say put whatever the hell you want on it. But there are certain things I can't sit there and agree to disagree with you that an entire group of people should be marginalized or threatened with hellfire, simply because of who they love or how they identify or so there's places for disagreement, and there's places where I think we have to stand our ground and say, actually, just not today, Satan. It's not going to happen. So I appreciate the fire in the hole. As soon as I read the title, I'm just thinking about pulling the pin on that grenade and going, fire in the hole. Let's get it done. But John, Bethany, anything you could say to rescue me from my rambling would be awesome.
No, I agree. Thank you for coming on, taking the time to talk with us. It's been a great, amazing conversation.
Yeah,
and
for
it's
sure.
a book that I think everyone needs to read this book. Like I said before we started recording, it's a book that I picked up and I could not put down. And it's just an amazing book.
Thank you. And thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really rich.
Yeah. Thanks, Robert. It's wonderful.
Thank you for listening to This Is Not Church. Be sure to rate and review the podcast on your platform of choice. If you would like to partner with us, visit patreon.com/thisisnotchurch, where you will receive exclusive content such as early access to episodes, videos of upcoming episodes, and live Q&A sessions. Be sure to check out our Facebook group or follow us on Twitter and Instagram. All the links are in the show notes. We'll be back soon with another episode.